A red hat, 4 words, make America great again. Today, those words are almost impossible to separate from one man, Donald Trump. But MAGA has become something much bigger than a campaign slogan. It has reshaped the Republican Party, changed America's debate over immigration, challenged decades of American trade policy, changed the way millions of Americans view the government, the media, and America's role in the world. It survived Trump's first presidency. It survived an election defeat. It survived January 6th. And 4 years after leaving Washington, Donald Trump returned to the White House. But that raises a surprisingly difficult question. What actually is MAGA? Is it conservatism, nationalism, populism, a political ideology, a personality-driven movement, or something completely different? Because to understand MAGA, we actually have to go back to a time before Donald Trump entered politics.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
For decades, the Republican Party had a relatively recognizable identity. Lower taxes, smaller government, free markets, a strong military, social conservatism, and generally, support for America's leadership of the international system. Republican presidents like Ronald Reagan championed free enterprise and confronted the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, Republicans largely supported globalization and international trade. Then came the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The financial crisis of 2008. Factories continued disappearing from industrial communities. China became an economic superpower. Illegal immigration became an increasingly powerful political issue, and millions of Americans began feeling that something was changing. Their country was becoming wealthier, but they didn't necessarily feel wealthier. Washington kept promising solutions, but trust in government continued falling, and resentment began building toward institutions Americans had once trusted: politicians, corporations, universities, the media, even leaders within the Republican Party itself. Something was happening underneath American politics. Then, a billionaire television personality came down an escalator. June 16, 2015. Donald Trump announced that he was running for president. Almost immediately, he broke nearly every rule of modern presidential politics. He insulted opponents, attacked the media.
Call women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
Made immigration central to his campaign, promised to build a wall along the southern border, questioned America's trade agreements, criticized the Iraq War, and attacked Republican leaders almost as aggressively as Democrats. The Republican establishment largely believed he couldn't win. There was just one problem. Republican voters kept voting for him. Trump understood something many traditional politicians had missed. A significant portion of the Republican base didn't simply dislike Democrats. They were angry at Republicans too. They believed politicians had allowed American manufacturing jobs to disappear overseas, that the border wasn't secure, that America's allies weren't paying enough for their own defense, that political correctness had gone too far, and that Washington's institutions cared more about elites than ordinary Americans. Trump offered them something different, not traditional conservatism, something closer to populist nationalism. America first. Protect American industries. secure the border, avoid unnecessary foreign wars, challenge international institutions, and above everything else, put America's interests first. And wrapped around all of it was one incredibly powerful slogan: Make America Great Again, MAGA. In November 2016, Trump shocked the political world. He defeated Hillary Clinton. And suddenly MAGA wasn't just a movement, it controlled the White House. This is where things become complicated. Because MAGA doesn't have a single manifesto. There isn't one book explaining exactly what every MAGA supporter believes. And supporters disagree on plenty. But several ideas consistently appear throughout the movement. The first is America First. MAGA generally argues that American policy should prioritize American citizens above international commitments. That influences everything from NATO to foreign aid to immigration. Then there's trade. For decades, Republicans were some of America's strongest defenders of free trade. Trump changed that. He embraced tariffs and argued that America needed to protect domestic industries. That represents one of MAGA's biggest departures from traditional Republican economics. Then there's immigration. MAGA supports much stronger border enforcement and restrictions on illegal immigration. For many supporters, immigration isn't simply an economic issue. It's connected to sovereignty, national identity, and the question of who gets to enter the country. Then there's culture. MAGA supporters frequently describe America as being threatened by progressive cultural change. Issues surrounding education, race, gender, religion, and political correctness became central political battlegrounds. And finally, there's distrust. Distrust of mainstream media, distrust of federal agencies, distrust of universities, distrust of political elites. MAGA supporters often describe these institutions collectively as the establishment. Trump's greatest political strength may have been convincing millions of people that he wasn't simply running against Democrats. He was running against an entire system. But that distrust would eventually collide with something much bigger: an American presidential election. November 2020. Donald Trump lost the presidential election to Joe Biden. But Trump refused to accept that the election had been legitimately decided. He and his allies alleged widespread fraud. Lawsuits were filed, recounts occurred, election officials investigated claims. But the evidence presented did not establish widespread fraud capable of changing the outcome of the election. Trump continued insisting the election had been stolen, and millions of Americans believed him. Then came January 6th, 2021. Congress gathered in Washington to formally count the electoral votes. Outside, thousands of Trump supporters gathered near the White House. Trump addressed them. He repeated claims about the election and encouraged supporters to march toward the Capitol. What happened next became one of the darkest and most controversial moments in modern American political history. Crowds overwhelmed police barriers. Windows were smashed. People entered the Capitol. Members of Congress were evacuated or sheltered. Police officers were assaulted. And the constitutional process for certifying the next president was interrupted. For hours, the world watched images that seemed almost impossible. Americans forcing their way into the building where American elections were being certified. Congress eventually returned. The electoral votes were counted. Joe Biden's victory was certified, and Trump left office 2 weeks later. Hundreds of January 6 participants would later be prosecuted. Trump would face a second impeachment and later criminal charges connected to efforts to overturn the 2020 election, although the legal and political aftermath would become extraordinarily complicated. For many Americans, January 6th became evidence that MAGA had crossed a dangerous line. Many Trump supporters saw the story differently. Some condemned the violence while arguing that legitimate concerns about election administration were being ignored. Others believed January 6th was being politically exploited to discredit the entire movement. Those competing interpretations became part of America's political divide, but there was another question. Had January 6th destroyed Donald Trump's political career? At first, it looked possible. Republicans publicly criticized him. Companies distanced themselves from him. Social media platforms suspended his accounts. Trump left Washington. Joe Biden became president, and MAGA appeared to have suffered its greatest defeat. But MAGA wasn't dead. Not even close. Over the next 4 years, something remarkable happened. Trump remained the dominant figure inside the Republican Party. Candidates sought his endorsement. Republican voters continued supporting him. Politicians who once opposed him increasingly disappeared from positions of influence inside the party. And many of Trump's ideas became Republican orthodoxy: immigration, tariffs, America First foreign policy, hostility toward establishment institutions. The Republican Party was changing. Then came 2024. Donald Trump ran for president again. This time, MAGA wasn't trying to take over the Republican Party. It largely was the Republican Party. Trump won the Republican nomination, then defeated Kamala Harris in the general election, and on January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump became president of the United States again. The man who had left Washington after January 6th walked back into the White House 4 years later. Whatever anyone thought about MAGA, one thing had become impossible to deny. It wasn't a temporary political rebellion. It had become one of the most powerful political movements in modern American history. The Republican Party of 2026 is very different from the Republican Party that existed before Donald Trump descended that escalator in 2015. And perhaps the biggest question surrounding MAGA now isn't whether it can survive another election. It's whether it can survive Donald Trump himself. Because eventually, Trump will no longer be its leader. If you enjoyed today's video, give a like and subscribe. We post every Saturday. Thank you for watching.